Hi, I'm Jo Gamel. Welcome back to episode 2 of Art in Quarantine. You remember my little ever-loving companion, Pongo Bongo, my little green poop machine and ever-present tree rat. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about two things: selecting objects for arranging, for rendering from observation for a still life, and monocular optics. So, you know that I am an art instructor here in Philadelphia at University City Arts League, Moore College of Art and Design, and I do private tutoring in Center City. But you may not know that I also studied art therapy at the graduate level in Seattle. So I want to talk to you about this prompt. This piece is about self-care for addressing stress. This suitcase represents the stress in my life, and all of the objects around it are ways that I can balance it, some coping mechanisms. Okay, so mostly I cope with food, but I also like to cope with champagne, face masks, and knickknacks, or kashki, which is the Russian word for cups, but I'm not Russian. Anyway, so you can use this information in today's episode to make something lighthearted like that, or you can do something a little bit more serious, like this painting. You see that one of the central objects in it is this bottle of Vanitas perfume by Versace. Okay, and this painting is all about Vanitas. It is a Vanitas painting. It's about the futility of life in its toil and conquest awash in time, right? Okay, so, and it's also about mass consumerism in an obsessive compulsive way of luxury products. So, the things that I'll talk to you about today, you can use to create this kind of piece as a very serious sort of thing, or something more lighthearted. So, let's get comfy, grab your favorite blanket. Okay, and now I'm going to talk to you about how you're going to set up your easel and the objects that you will observe for rendering for your still life. So, first of all, you want to have complete control over the lighting. So no natural light, you only want to use indoor lights. Next, you might want to create a final piece that's like this size. And so when you're setting up your easel or your tabletop easel, or even if you're just leaning something on a wall or even holding it in your lap, you're going to want to stand in front of it and in front of where you'll put your objects in such a way that you don't need to move your head to look at the objects, or you move your head as little as possible to look between the two. Shh. Okay. His only desire in life is shoulder rides. But you don't want to work directly onto your final material. You'll probably want to use something a little bit smaller for your first couple of sketches, just to help yourself decide what your final arrangement of the objects will be. So if you choose something that's scaled down, and your final material is going to be something like this, that's 18 by 24, you're going to want to use something that's at least 9 by 12, so that you can get things in proportion. You get the same overall ratio as your final piece. So, if you're going to be looking down onto a surface, you can expect that your piece will have a perspective that appears that you're looking down onto the image. And then you're also going to want to consider that your piece, your sketches, even your first painting sketches, would just be in black and white. You can actually move directly from a black and white painting to a color one through some classical master techniques that use a lot of glazing with oils, and you'll get some more information on that in future episodes. So, when it comes to arranging where objects go in your still life, you can use the Fibonacci sequence like we talked about before. Remember that the bones in your finger are approximately the same division point as the Fibonacci sequence. It should actually be perfect. Okay. So, one of the first parts of setting up your still life will be to have something solid behind it. You don't have to use what I'm going to suggest, but I'm going to explain why this will be great for you. Black velvet absorbs light in a way that allows you to control how much reflection is happening. The less reflection there is from the environment around the pieces, the more simple it is for you to render the light. So, I'm creating sort of a box, and you'll find, if you look through some archives, that most old masters, they did set up a box like this. A lot of still life artists will set up a box. You can build a box out of cardboard too. If you just have a box from the mail or something, you can even construct one out of like cereal boxes. The next part is that you're going to want to have probably a light background. You can also have, a light ground, but you could also have a light background if you want it. So, the color of canvas, or even better, the color of marble, is a really great neutral that has warms and cools in it, so that you can render more cool tones and sort of mid-tones and gray in the back, and then you can keep warmer tones in the front to sort of help the eye read it in space. Get off me, get off. Okay, so for this still life, I'm going to start with something very simple. You'll choose more interesting objects that are more significant to you and probably will be more fun to render. But I'm going to use these rotting limes in different stages of rot. And as you can see, they are very different colors. So I'm going to put the brightest, lightest colors in the front and anything with like cooler, darker tones towards the back. You might as well make it easier for yourself to render depth this way. Okay, ooh, pink sticker, great. So when you're painting these, you automatically have the lightest things in the front. I want to talk to you a little bit more about optics. So, our eyes take in information to create stereo vision. Stereo vision is a comparison of images. Images are projected onto our retinas at different angles. One eye looks straight at something, and the other sort of turns inward. Or if you have a sometimes lazy eye like me, one eye turns outward and then it becomes useless, lazy. The disparity between the images is how we understand how near or far away something is. But that only works in binocular vision. When we are translating a 3D world onto a 2D surface, we are using monocular vision. And there are still some clues that our eyes can use in order to tell us how near or far something is. So, one of those things is occlusion, and occlusion is just when a nearer object blocks a part of an object that's further away. Another aspect is blur or haze. That's the blue atmosphere that can create something. If a mountain is very, very far away, miles or kilometers away, it'll have a blue haze in front of it. Things that are nearer to us will probably look warmer and brighter. So if you have a red object and you want to put it somewhere in your still life, don't put it in the back. Don't put a blue object in the front. Okay? Think about how you read color in depth and arrange your objects accordingly. Another thing that has to do with size, besides that hazy blur, is focus. And that's how our eyes accommodate scale. If you hold your finger up right in front of your nose, you can feel some pressure on the outside of your eyes. That's your muscles in your eyes pushing your pupils together to be able to read the details of what's right in front of your face. But holding it further away, you'll find that you do not have as much pressure on the outside of your eyes. And that pressure relates in your brain and lets your brain understand how far away something is. So when you're looking at a two-dimensional surface, your eyes don't have different depths to read, unless it's like very tall or just so big that you can't see it all at once. And when something is that large, a different process occurs called synthesis. And our brain is actually looking at many different parts in focus and then putting them all together in a composite image. But the final composite image that we see is not something that we've ever seen. It's something that our brain puzzles together for us, but we can't actually see the whole thing. It's too large. Some other things that you can actually use in 2D rendering of 3D space are height and plane. When things are higher in a plane, they appear to be further away from us than things that are lower in the plane. Linear perspective is probably something that you're familiar with from middle school, where lines converge in space. Okay? Just so you know, vertical lines will always stay vertical, right? And those parallel lines, they don't actually converge because they're parallel. If you did that like cityscape with the sky rises and you had all your buildings converge at a point in the back, you probably thought, this doesn't really look as realistic as I thought. And that's because those lines actually bend in space a bit and they never really converge. And then lastly, shading. So we assume, our brains assume that light comes from above, right? The sun is above us. This is like the world we developed in, and so that's what we're used to thinking. So if you are lighting something from underneath, you're challenging yourself to render form and depth much more than if you light something from directly above. Okay? So use these cues to help yourself render depth, and really form is just rendering depth in a smaller area. If you're rendering a hill in space, you're using the same principles as if you were rendering the curve of an egg. Okay, so let's take an in-depth look at some of those terms. Some of them might be new for you. So, as I said, we have binocular vision. We have two eyes, okay? Our brains synthesize the disparity in the retinal images that we get to create a 3D image. When we paint, we're making a 2D image, and we have monocular vision. As a result, we're just using one eye. So, with one eye, we are using those different cues that I talked about to infer distance. First, you should understand a little bit about light. Light is a wavelength. It is not an object. It is made of particles. So it is both photon particles and their flow. So it is made of wavelengths. These wavelengths can be translated into pitch, so we can echolocate in our environment without sight. We can hear the visual world. Okay. So radio waves, microwaves, infrared rays. The camera can see infrared rays. If I point this remote at you, you can see light coming out of it that I can't see with my regular eyes. My regular eyes. Anyway, and then there's visible light and ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. Okay, gamma rays are cool because of the cool band Gamma Ray from Germany, right? Anyway, infrared are also interesting because if you hold a cell phone up to an electric guitar, when it's plugged into an amp, it will create these spaceship sounds. And the thing is, we can't see those, but the camera eye can't actually see everything that we see in visible light. Dappled light is difficult for a camera. It's the light that light and shadow that occur beneath a tree with leaves on it. The camera will try to balance the value in the color, but the human eye can read it better. And just in case you don't know about the three parts of color, it's value, which is how black or white something is, the grays in between. Chroma, which is the intensity of the color. Is it neon or is it pastel? We achieve pastel colors with white, but also black. They're a bit gray. And then there's hue. Hue is it red, orange, yellow, green, blue, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Red on the color or on this frequency is the low frequency, and violet is the high frequency. So everything else in between, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, they change in pitch as well. So our eyes have these cones inside of them, and there's two different kinds of cones. There are trichromatic cones and monochromatic cones. No, actually, they're not even chromatic. Sorry, that's not clear. These perceive value. Okay, how bright or dark light is. The trichromatic cones they can't see all colors. So something like yellow, for example, is actually red and green mixed together. Orange is the harmonizing of frequencies between red and yellow. Okay? Frequency is an independent property. So color correction happens when the firing of the red cones in our eyes, in our retina, eventually habituate or fire more slowly, correcting to green. That's why it's so exciting to look at complementary colors, because we're firing totally different cones inside of our eyes. Okay. Something else that changes color is the environmental ground. Good luck with my handwriting. So when you see beautiful little coral pebbles on the gray Atlantic sand, they look very vibrant. But then when you take them home and wash them, they're sort of disappointingly dull. That's because there's bioecology statistics, retinal readings, that are creating context from the reflected light and the illumination around color, and that changes the way that we see the color. Okay? So it's always, if you want something in your paintings or your artwork to look as vibrant as possible, like truly glowing, don't put it in a bright red background. Put it in something very neutral. Okay? So the environmental ground will change the way that we see chroma, and it'll change the way that we see hue, but it doesn't change the way that we see value. If you had a photograph in Photoshop and you manipulated the hue, you made the whole picture more blue, and then you reduced all the chroma to black and white, the black and white values don't change. Okay, you could make the whole thing red and then eliminate all the chroma to black and white, and it would look the same. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things you can actually use for your 2D monocular one-eyed painting. I feel a song coming on. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples of what you can use. So, this is our textbook for the class. Sorry about the nipples, I can't cover them all up at the same time. But let's talk about some of the principles that we can see in art from this perfect textbook. So we already know that we can use perspective to indicate depth. This is a great example of perspective. This is Miriam Shapiro's Fallen XO. Okay. Not terribly fluid. Okay. This image shows us proximity. We understand these lines in rows because of their proximity to each other. Gathered things appear as a group. Okay? It's kind of like the Pussycat Dolls. All of the girls are really pretty, and then when you get them all together, it changes our perception and they become these goddesses that are unachievable. Probably too obscure for a lot of age groups, but I remember. Ugh. Okay, over here, continuity. We assume that this red line continues behind her, even though we can't really see the whole red line. Okay, so consider how you can use continuity in your work. Similarity. There's a similarity between these shapes in this image by Judy Chicago. It's called Childhood Rejection Drawing. Common fate. Lines that move in the same direction appear to be related. This is Rita Dona's contour. Okay. Here we have Andrea Flank's Marilyn Vanitas from 1977. There's a lot of great things to see in this. This is a part of why still life is so excellent as a method for practicing observation and rendering and creating atmosphere and depth and all these other things. It's just any kind of observed work is going to give you a lot more opportunities to practice, but still life in particular because you have the control of the setup. So simplicity is this concept that we tend to credit the most simple answer over the equally plausible complex ones. So for example, occlusion, right? Occlusion is a part of simplicity. Occlusion is when one object is blocking a part of another. This is blocking the book, but we don't assume that there's a hole in the book that this is sitting inside of. We assume that the book is behind the paintbrush. There's also height and plane. We assume that this book with Marilyn Monroe in it is further back than the lipstick or than other objects in the painting because of its height in the plane. There's the shading and the shadows that indicate for us which objects sit in front, okay? In this painting by Jacqueline Fahey, Christine in the Pantry, we see a lot of occlusion, okay? And we also see height and plane. We assume that this drawer is nearer to us than these shelves are just because of their height and plane, even though the painting itself is actually pretty flat. Lots of occlusion. We assume that there's a whole person behind this wall and piece of fabric, even though we can't see it. It's a part of the closure of our brain filling in the missing info. Okay. Over here, we have another great example of proximity and similarity, grouping by similar objects and gathered things appear as a group. That is Yayoi Kusama's Silver Shoes. Yayoi Kusama, you're really familiar with her name already because she does those mirrored rooms. Okay. Very popular. Everybody loves to take Instagram photos in the mirrored rooms. And then common fate. Common fate is something where we assume something like schools of fish moving in the same direction are related to each other rather than seeing them as individual fish. Another thing is people in lines, okay, they have a common fate. This amazing work is called Goddess. It's by one of my favorite artists, Niki de Saint-Phal. Okay. There's her name. Oh, focus. Well, okay. Anyway, Niki. Okay, and just another example of closure. This is really important for everyone in my drawing classes. We cannot see an end to this black in this painting by Leonardo da Vinci. It's his painting of Ginevra de Benici. This was his platonic soulmate, he would say. Very smart, charming, beautiful lady. Anyway, we can't see the end of this black shape. We also can't see where the back of her head ends, but our brain fills in that information. And it's really important to let go of the idea that you need to begin your drawing with outlines because you can't always see the outline of something. And it's also important to let go of the idea that you need to fully render every part of the form. Some things can be left out, and our brain has the ability to create closure based on what it sees. And then lastly, this is a painting by Renoir when he was in Algeria, and it's a great example of Gestalt, how the parts, the sum of the parts, are different than the whole. Okay? So, you can think a little bit about these things as you look at images and how we perceive depth. Okay? And yeah, thanks guys. Hopefully you'll find this information really useful. Next episode, you're going to get a lot more information about how our eyes and retinas perceive color, and a little bit about how color operates in paint. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.